But let's get into now the different stages of development, what those different stages look like. And we're going to start with newborns. So as you might be aware, newborns sleep a lot. So it's estimated about 16 to 18 hours of sleep per day. And if you remember back to the consciousness lecture, we talked about why sleep is so important. So we talked about how REM sleep is important for growing your mind and kind of mind health, whereas the non-REM sleep is important for growing your body and immune system. And we also know that they spend a lot of time crying. So maybe you've experienced this yourself. We tend to think crying is like their first sign of communication. They're able to sort of kind of um, show or tell their caregivers that there is something wrong, they need something, something is upsetting them, that type of thing. It's their way of trying to capture attention and communicate some issue. And we know that when newborns are awake, which you can tell is fewer hours now, because we've used up most of our 24 hours in sleeping and crying, newborns tend to alternate between looking very alertly at things and kind of moving and getting used to their body parts. So some of that alert looking, you might think back to, we talked about newborns' lack of visual acuity. So they see things really blurry, and often they kind of fixate because there's some new thing that's really interesting and novel to them. And they might need to stare at it a little bit longer because they can't quite make it out as quickly as we can with our really clear-cut vision. Now, I have this little GIF on the right, which might be hella distracting, my bad. But this is actually a GIF from my research lab. So it's kind of one of the things that I study. I study what newborns' brains tend to look like and what connections are already there and what different functions their brain regions have from birth. So one of the main questions that my lab studies, and one of the main questions in the field of developmental neuroscience in general, is how many of our brain's connections are innate? How many of them exist from birth? And how many of those connections have to develop with experience instead? Turns out that's a hella complicated question, just like everything in this field. But there's a lot of evidence that some underlying structure already exists from birth. Things like newborns already have regions that respond to faces. Remember how we talked about in the neuroscience lecture, we have a little area in our temporal lobe that responds to faces. It's in the same area in newborns as it is in adults. But the regions aren't as good at responding to faces. They're not quite as selective to faces as that same region in adults. So basically, like everything in this lecture, if you take one thing away, there's an influence of both nature, that underlying structure, and nurture, experience, and development as newborn brains develop. So it's fascinating to think about what a newborn's brain looks like. So I'm going to show you a quick little video. Let's see, hopefully this isn't too jumpy because I know Zoom hates recording videos. But this is going to kind of talk you through and show you what a newborn looks like and what their different reflexes look like.